Hi everyone, my name is Terry, and in this video we're going to change the front wheel on a Ducati V2 Panigale. First we're going to get it into the garage so there's nice clear space all the way around it and put it on its rear stand. I wasn't originally going to make a video about this. I normally just do classic bike DIY, but when I looked on YouTube for guidance on how to do this, I only found two videos, both by complete fucking idiots. One who was opening up the brake pads with a screwdriver, and the other who didn't even bother aligning the front axle once you got the wheel in. So I thought, what the heck, let's put something on and give people some decent guidance. There are some slightly awkward elements of this. One of them is that your front stand needs to be quite tall. If you've got a Warrior stand, and they're quite popular and I had one, it won't quite fit and you'll damage the fairing if you put it on. So here's one I borrowed from my mate Leather. Cheers Leather, and this fits perfectly. You can also use the front stand that locates underneath the fork legs. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just that I find the ones that go into the headstock are much more secure. I've got more confidence in them. And here's a close-up so that you can see where the spigot goes into the headstock and locates to keep things straight. Now I'm hooking a bungee off one of the brackets on top of the handlebars, and that's to hold the caliper once we remove it. And you'll see that as we try and turn the caliper bolts, the top one in particular is pretty stiff. You should put some moly grease on these bolts when you put them back in. You'll see that later. So here we are, just taking out the caliper bolts. You'll notice that the lower of the two bolts, and this is the same both sides, has got a fairly thick spacer or washer, and the upper one goes through a small bracket which holds what Ducati call the cat's eye, which is an orange reflector there to make you a little bit easier to see from the side at night. With the two caliper bolts removed, there's enough room to then slip the caliper off the brake disc without scratching the wheel, hook it onto the bungee, and that stops any undue pressure going onto the brake lines so that we don't damage the banjo bolt. And we simply repeat this process on the right hand side of the bike. At this point it can be helpful to put a couple of bricks underneath the wheel, one at the front and one at the back, and that just helps take the weight off it and it makes the next bit a little bit easier, but it's not strictly necessary. With this being quite a tall front stand, I need a little bit of wood as well, so we get enough height to take the pressure off. The front axle nut is a standard 30mm socket, but you can buy this combined tool which also fits the rear axle nut, which is very strange and not something you'd find in your ordinary socket set. So the combined tool is pretty cheap. You can pick them up on eBay for next to nothing. And here I am now, just undoing the front axle nut. Now when this comes off, you'll notice that there is a washer that comes away with the nut as well. Now the axle nut holds the axle in place in terms of left and right movement, but what stops it rotating are these pinch bolts, two underneath the left and two underneath the right fork. And if these weren't tight, we wouldn't have been able to undo the axle nut. And being Allen head bolts, they're quite easy to strip, so just take a little bit of care here to make sure that your hex tool is all the way into the end of the bolt before you put any pressure on it. So the pinch bolts out, I'm just pushing with my right thumb on the end of the axle, and then you can pull it out from the left hand side of the bike. Again, this is something that needs greasing before it goes back in, and you can tell whether the previous person has done you a favour or not by how easier it comes out. Now there's no impediment to removing the front wheel. Just be careful, as with any motorbike, there's a spacer on each side, and if it drops out and you don't notice, you wouldn't want to lose it. So on the right hand side you have quite a short spacer, and on the left hand side a longer one. Now the reason I'm removing the wheels is to do a tyre change, but this isn't a tyre change video. There's plenty of those on the internet. And if you were changing your tyres for the first time, you certainly wouldn't start with a Ducati, would you? You'd do something a little bit less valuable. But just for the sake of completeness, I'll just put a speeded up version with a little bit of music of the tyre change before we get back to the installation. to wheel installation, first we'll replace the spacers. The long spacer on the left hand side of the wheel, the short spacer on the right hand side of the wheel. It's easy to tell which side of the wheel you're looking at because the filler valve points towards you on the right hand side of the wheel. Now some WD-40 and a little bit of paper. I'm going to clean up the axle and also the axle holes, and then I'm going to apply some molybdenum grease or moly grease to the axle itself, and this will just make it a little bit easier to remove the next time we go to take the front wheel out, because it should prevent any corrosion building up inside there. Now we'll just roll the wheel into position, making sure it's the right way around, and then back to my trusty bricks again, and this is just to hold the wheel in roughly the right position. You'll still have to lift it up with one hand while you put the axle in. You'll never get it exactly right using bricks, but it makes it a lot closer, makes the whole process less of a chore. Now we just slide our freshly greased axle in from the right hand side of the bike, and obviously we're going to have to lift the wheel up a little bit just to get that final bit of alignment to get it through the left hand fork. Now we've already greased the end of the thread. When we grease the axle, we just put a little bit of grease on the inside of the nut as well to prevent water ingress and any corrosion, making it stiff to get off next time. And this just pops into the space around the thread, making sure the washer's on. Now at this stage we're just going to do it up, not to its torque, but we'll use a torque wrench just to get it firmly snugged up, shall we say, but we don't want to torque it up just yet. Then we'll clean up and then a little bit of moly grease onto each of the caliper bolts, and then we'll get the caliper back onto the disc. Now, as long as you haven't accidentally pressed the front brake lever, or you've left this for days until you've put it back on, you should easily be able to get the brake pads either side of the disc. But if they've closed up and you can't for any reason, for God's sake, don't try and pry them apart with a screwdriver, as I've seen one dickhead do recently. Try prizing them apart with your fingers. If that doesn't work, then a little wedge-shaped piece of wood or something plastic, anything that's softer than the material the brake pads are made from. And you should remember at this point that the lower bolt has got the thick washer stroke spacer that it goes through, and the upper one has got the little bracket which holds on the cat's eye or the orange reflector. And that's quite easy the way it goes on. It just sort of sits so that the cat's eye sits at 90 degrees to the caliper and just below the bolt. Pretty obvious when you put it on. Now at this point the Ducati manual rather unhelpfully says do up the bolts to 2 Newton meters. Now have you got a torque wrench that goes down at 2 Newton meters? No, neither do I. What it means is you just want it on relatively snug, so you will need to use a hex head, and you will need to sort of snug it up, but what you don't want to do is make it too tight, because we are now going to align the calipers and the brake pads with the disc by spinning the wheel and squeezing the brake lever, and only then, with lots of brake pressure applied, are we going to tighten this down to its full torque. So now that we've spun the wheel and applied the brake a few times, we're going to apply pressure on the brake lever and tighten to 45 Newton meters. This is quite easy on the right hand side of the bike because everything's quite close, but it's a bit of a circus act when you come around to do it on the left hand side of the bike. I found the easiest way to do this was to straddle the front wheel and do it facing towards the rear of the bike. And the next sequence is what sometimes people find a bit confusing, so I'll try and go through it in slow time and explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. So just unscrew the pinch bolts, the 4 of them, 2 each side, that we loosened earlier, clean them up, put some moly grease on them, and then we're going to put them back. And what we're going to do now is tighten these up, and the manual says 6 Newton meters, which isn't very much, and that's going to stop the axle rotating, and that will then allow us to tighten the axle nut to the specified torque. As you tighten up these bolts to 6 Newton meters, alternate from one to another so that you tighten them down evenly. Don't do one and then do the other. With that done, we'll now tighten the front wheel axle nut to the specified torque, which is 63 Newton meters. Now I'm going to return to the pinch bolts on the right hand side of the bike, and I'm going to free them off so the axle can move within the fork leg. That's because on this side the axle is free, but on the other side it's captive. And what we want to do is bounce the bike on its suspension so the axle finds its natural position. So the idea now is we'll lower the bike at the front by taking the stand off, still attached at the rear paddock stand of course. Now we'll grab the front brake, both handlebars, and bounce the bike up and down, and that will allow the axle to find its natural place within the fork leg before we do up the pinch bolts again. And again, when you do this, just alternate from bolt to bolt and sneak up on 6 Newton meters so that you don't strip ahead or apply uneven pressure to the axle. And we're pretty much done, but as a final check I'll just put the front stand on again, rotate the wheel, apply the brakes, and make sure that everything is working nice and smoothly without any undue friction. So there you have it. I hope that was useful. And if you're an American YouTuber watching this, just remember there's many a man wandering the streets of London with no arse in his trousers because he didn't align his front axle. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, guys. Ride safely.